Are you familiar with callback hell or pyramid of doom? In JavaScript, it is caused by the excessive use of nested callbacks with a single function, leading to difficulty understanding the code, harder debugging, trouble handling errors, maintainability issue, and failure to reuse code. JavaScript introduced promises as a part of ES6 to solve this problem. So, what is a promise? A promise in JavaScript is an object that represents the eventual success or failure of an asynchronous operation. JavaScript promises can have one of three possible states. The first one is pending or the initial state, then it has a fulfilled state or a rejected state. In fulfilled state, it means the operation or the promise was successful, and the rejected state means that the operation or the promise failed. So, let's learn more about how we can create a JavaScript promise and how JavaScript promises work. Let's consider a scenario. You're tired, so you want to have a cup of coffee, and for that you go to a coffee shop to drink coffee. You have only $5 in your pocket. So if the coffee price is within $5, you get your coffee, and if that's not the case, and the coffee price is more than $5, you stay tired. And to solve this problem, we are going to use promise. So let's create a promise. To do that, let's declare a variable named promise. And let's type the new keyword and space promise. This promise takes a callback. So let's declare the callback. And inside the callback function, we are going to pass two parameters. First one is resolve and the second one is reject. Now let's declare another variable named available money, which is $5. Let's declare another variable coffee price, and in this variable we are going to store the coffee price, and for that we are going to use the random function from the math library. So let's type math.random. This random function generates a number between 0 to 1, and we want to get a number between 1 to 10. To get that, we are going to multiply this math.random number with 10. We want to get a whole number, so in order to do that, let's use the math.round method. Now let's type the condition that if coffee price is less than or equal to available money, we are going to resolve the promise, and as a parameter we are going to pass the coffee price, else we are going to reject the promise, and as a parameter I am also going to pass the coffee price. So this is how our promise looks like. So when we are resolving the promise or fulfilling the promise or rejecting the promise, we have to do something. Like when the promise is fulfilled, we are going to perform an action. When the promise is rejected, in that case also we are going to perform an action. And in order to do that, let's define a new function. We are going to call it buy coffee. And as a parameter, we are going to pass the coffee price. Within this function, we are going to console log coffee price is, and we are going to print another console log saying as the coffee price is less than or equal to our available money, we are going to say that here is your coffee. Now let's define another function in case when our promise gets rejected. So let's define another function named cancel order, and this function will also accept a parameter which is the coffee price, and in the function body we're going to print the price of the coffee. So let's copy the console log from the buy coffee one, and then we are going to print another message saying sorry, you don't have enough money. So yeah, we are done with the methods that's going to take action when our promise is either fulfilled or rejected. So now it's time to perform these operations. In order to do that, we are going to use the promise object, and with this we are going to use the then method. Inside this method, we are going to pass the buy coffee method when the promise is resolved, and the cancel order method for the case when the promise is rejected. So our code is now ready. So let's run it. As you can see, our code ran successfully, and the coffee price is $2, and as it is within our budget, we get to see the line here is your coffee. Let's run it again. In the second case, the coffee price is $7, and this is more than the money that we have. So we get to see in the console that sorry, you don't have enough money. So this is how we can create promises promises to solve our use cases. Now there is another way to handle the rejected promise. To do that, we have another method called catch method. In this catch method, we are going to pass the method that we wrote to handle the rejected promise. So let's copy the name of the method and pass it as a parameter of that catch method. Now let's run the code again. Yeah, our code is working. So as you can see, we are getting the same results as we got before. Let's run it again. Yeah, so this is how we can use the catch method to handle the rejected promise more elegantly. Till now, we were considering how to handle one promise. But in real life scenario, there can be multiple promises that we need to handle. We can do that by using the chain promises. Let's see how we can implement the chain promises. Let's add more scenarios when we are buying the coffee. Let's say when your coffee price is less than or equals to available money, first we are going to show a message to the customer that we are preparing your coffee. So let's change the message here, say preparing your coffee. Then we are going to define the process of brewing the coffee. So let's say first we are going to boil the water. So let's define a method named boil water, and inside this function we are going to console log boiling water. After that, let's define another function called add coffee powder. And inside this function, we are going to console log adding coffee powder to the hot water. Next, we are going to create another method named serve coffee. And inside this method, we are going to console log enjoy your coffee. Alright, our methods are ready. So let's see how we can implement the change promises. To do that, after the first .then method, we are going to call another .then method. Inside this then method, we are going to pass the second function, which is boil water. And after that, we are going to create another then method. And inside this function, we are going to pass the add coffee powder method. Then in another then method, we are going to pass the serve coffee method. So what will happen now that when the promise is fulfilled or resolved, it's going to execute the first method. Then when it's done, it's going to execute the second method, and then it's going to execute the third method, and that's the fourth method, and so on. So to check that, let's run this code. So as you can see, our chain promises is working as expected. As the coffee price is less than our available money, it's executing the first method, which is preparing your coffee, and then the second method, which is boiling water, the third method, which is adding coffee powder to the hot water, and then it's executing enjoy your coffee. So this is how we can use the chain promises to execute multiple actions. Now let's consider another scenario. Suppose our promise got rejected or our promise got resolved. Whatever the scenario is, we want to perform a certain action after these are done. To do that, promise provide us a method named finale. No matter what the status of our promise is, let's implement the finale method. So after we are done with our then and catch method, we are going to create the finale method. So let's type finale, and within this finale method, we are going to pass the method name that we want to execute. So let's pass a method name greeting. We didn't create the greeting method yet, so let's create it. Let's type function greeting. This doesn't take any parameter, and within this function body, let's console log have a nice day. Let's run our code to see result. Yeah, so after all the actions, the finale was executed and we got have a nice day message in our console. Let's run it one more time. As you can see, our promise got rejected, but we still got the greeting because of the finale method. So this is how you can create and use JavaScript promise. Now let's look at some of the methods that come bundled with promise. Here we have defined 3 promises. 2 of the promises contain set timeout method. Now let's look at the first method that comes with promises. Now let's look at the first method, which is the promise.all method. This method accepts an array of promises and returns a single promise as the output. If all the promises are resolved, the single promise will contain an array of values. If any one promise is rejected, then the promise.all returns a rejected promise with a reason. Let's test it out. Let's run the code and see what happens. As you can see, we got the first promise, the second promise, and the third promise within an array. So we are resolving all the promises that we have defined. Now let's change the second promise. Let's pass reject in the second promise and modify the message that second promise rejected. Now let's run the code. As you can see, the second promise was rejected. It's only printing the message from the second promise. The second one is promise.raise method. Like promise.all, promise.raise accepts an array of promises and returns a single promise as the output. This single promise contains the fastest completed promise. This promise can be resolved or rejected. Let's test it out. So as you can see, our first promise and our second promise take time to execute. Among these three promises, promise 3 is the fastest one, as we didn't provide any set timeout method inside this promise. That's why promise.raise method is returning the fastest promise, which is the promise 3, and we got the message third promise. Now let's change it. Let's change it to reject and change the message to reject. Now let's run the code again. And as you can see, though this promise got rejected, it's still getting logged in our output window because this is the fastest promise among these three promises. The third promise method is any method. This promise.any method returns a single promise and it contains the first resolved promise. It will only return a rejected promise when none of the promise is fulfilled. Let's run the code and see. Here, the first promise and second promise getting rejected. Only the first promise is getting resolved. That's why we got the first promise in our output window. Now, if we reject the first promise also and change the message to rejected and run the code again, we can see an elaborate message on the output window. It's saying that all promises were rejected, and it's also showing the rejected message, which is first promise rejected, second promise is also rejected, and third promise is also rejected. The fourth one is promise.all settled. This method returns a single promise when all the promises in the input array have settled down. This single promise contains all the resolved and rejected promise. Let's run our code, and as you can see, as the status was rejected, it's showing the status rejected and the reason of the rejection. So if we change the promise 1 to resolve and promise 3 to resolve and run the code again, all the promises has been returned as an array, and within this array we are getting the status and value of each promise. Promises are the building blocks for smooth and efficient asynchronous operations in today's modern JavaScript. I hope by now you have a good understanding on JavaScript promises. If you do, please give this video a like and make sure to subscribe. See you in the next video. Till then, take care.